Hey everybody, I'm Chris Fafalius, and I'm the producer of Krista Makes a Podcast and the host of the One Hit Thunder podcast.
And I'm Matt Kelly, host of Horror Movie Night and the producer / the head of content for the Geekscape Podcasting Network.
Between the two of us, we have, believe it or not, 25 years of podcasting experience, and we want to help you start your own podcast.
We know podcasting, and we want to share that knowledge with you.
So whether you're new to podcasting or you want some feedback on your currently active podcast, we want to help.
Or perhaps you're just overwhelmed with all of the editing work. Well, we can help you with that also.
You can check out our website at weknowpodcasting.com for more information.
We're excited to help your podcasting dreams become a reality. And welcome to another episode of Horror Movie Night. This week we are talking about 1991's Nothing But Trouble as picked by Brian. So here's the question. Here's what I want to ask you guys. Do we want to dive into the movie right away, or do you want me to tell you a little bit of how this movie happened from the research I did first?
Given the fact that you have 2 pages, I would suggest that you find a way to sprinkle it in throughout the episode.
Oh, no. It's 2 separate pages. One page
That's what I mean. So, sprinkle.
I'll try to do the quickest version of this, because it's a lot of the same stuff. But the basic vibe is that this movie that Brian picked, Nothing But Trouble, is inspired by an actual event that happened to Dan Aykroyd.
Yes.
In 1978, he got pulled over for speeding and was taken to a judge's house in the middle of the night to hold a trial. And because of that, he was like, that's fucking weird. That shouldn't happen. Something really bad could happen if that happened to somebody. And it was like a crazy guy. I'm going to write a movie about it. And we got nothing but trouble out of that.
Yes. And this movie was treated unfairly. This movie deserves a Snyder cut, or an Aykroyd cut, if you will, to see the original gory, dark comedy that it was supposed to be. And I just want you to be aware, Matt, before you attack me, and I wish I could say it to Scott, but I can't, but I can say it to you. If you were a director, you would make this movie as well. And it's not because you're a bad director, it's because Dan Aykroyd couldn't say no to anyone on set.
So that's what I wanted to get into. So the studio insisted that this be a PG-13, even though he very much shot an R-rated movie. So that was the first issue. The other big issue was that Dan Aykroyd did not want to direct this movie. Mm-hmm. He had no desire to direct this movie, but no one else wanted to make it. And he was like, I want this movie to exist. If the only way it's going to get made is that I agree to direct it at a lower cost to get the movie made, then that's what I'll do. But like John Landis said no, Ivan Reitman said no, and John Hughes all said no to him when he pitched this movie to them.
John Hughes actually liked it though.
Yeah, John Hughes
said,
was like, all right.
I'm only making John Hughes movies. I did read that much.
So what ended up happening, and this is where like the big divide is that Dan Aykroyd is such an actor and apparently just such a nice person that he was like, well, let me do this the way I would like to do it if I was on a movie set. So every actor in the movie was given their own personal monitor, and they could give their own notes on what they think that Dan Aykroyd should do as a director based on the performances that they were seeing. And this was a film made by committee, and it ended up being that the crew thought that Dan Aykroyd was the greatest person they ever worked with. Any idea that they came up with, he was like, let's see if we can make it happen. Follow your heart's desire, get as weird as possible. They all hated Chevy Chase because Chevy Chase is human refuse. Yeah. And even though he did this movie as a favor to Dan Aykroyd and knew that Dan Aykroyd took a pay cut to get this movie made, continued to point out that he got paid more than the directors, and that's how big of a star Chevy Chase is while they were on the set of the movie, so much so that a crew member apparently pulled Dan Aykroyd to the side and said, if you want me to accidentally...
Chase. I thought that they told Chevy Chase, if you keep disrespecting Dan, we're going to drop a brick on your head.
Maybe that's what it was. But yeah, the only other big notes that I pulled when I was doing some of the research on this that I thought was interesting is that one of the first choices for the lead role was Rick Moranis, and I think this movie would be a lot more enjoyable with Rick Moranis, because Chevy Chase so clearly doesn't want to be in this movie at all, and I think Rick Moranis would have tried.
That would have made so much more sense, too.
Yeah.
Because, like, Chevy Chase doesn't play awkward, he plays prick. Rick Moranis plays awkward and not prick. Perfect.
Yeah, it would have made it more easy to digest, and then this story I just thought was funny was that Ebert hated the movie so much that when he was at a screening of it and there were kids heckling, he got up and walked over and asked them to please be a little bit louder because you could still hear some of the movie.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums up what this movie is, though. It's bad. It is a bad flick.
Brian and I were talking about a little bit before you jumped on to record, Scott, and I told him, like, there are things that are interesting about Nothing But Trouble, because it really is, like, they are throwing anything on the wall that they can. But the biggest problem is that it's a comedy that's not funny.
Well, no, the funniest thing about you explaining this movie is that you didn't explain why it was made. Like, it was literally because Dan Aykroyd's best friend, who I believe he wrote Ghostbusters with, right?
Yeah.
They co-wrote it. He had broken a rib, and they were he said, let's go out to see a movie, but not a comedy because I don't want to laugh. So they go see fucking Hellraiser. And they're in the theater, and people are laughing at the horror, and they're like, we should write a horror comedy. Yeah. And they know nothing about horror comedies, apparently.
There's another story that I heard also, which I think is equally funny, which is that it just said, one day Dan Aykroyd thought how funny it would be for John Candy to be dressed like a woman, and he liked the idea so much, he was like, all right, I gotta write a movie in which that becomes part of it. So all of this was based around, let's get John Candy in drag because Dan Aykroyd thought it would be kind of funny to see.
But here's the thing is, like, I can't be mad at Dan Aykroyd because he is a kind soul. I've always liked Dan Aykroyd. I don't think that he's
a little insane.
Is he? Tell me. Explain.
Not insane in a bad way. Like,
no,
not
just
like
he
he's
really
insane
like he's like Tom DeLonge with aliens.
Yeah.
Like,
he believes in
really,
aliens.
But like so much to the point that like things that have been disproven and found out as hoaxes, he still believes. Like, he believes everything.
That's why his liquor is shaped like the Crystal Skull, like is the Crystal
he
Skull
believes
vodka.
in Crystal Skulls.
Crystal Skull tequila or whatever, that's his?
Yeah, that's Dan Aykroyd.
He believes they're real. In this day and age, if, like, your insanity as a celebrity is harmlessly believing in aliens, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. That's not hurting anybody, really. The thing with this movie is that it is such a crazy idea. And it's definitely, like, in the one book that I was reading, because I reread the chapter about this in Wild and Crazy Guys this morning just to kind of refresh myself a little bit. And they said, like, this movie is like, you have Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, John Candy, Demi Moore, all at a point in their careers where they are just, like, hitting it out of the park. Nobody is going to tell them no about ideas. And it literally wasn't until, like, Warner Brothers watched the final cut where they were like, oh no, we can't do this. But, like, no one said a damn word about Dan Aykroyd being like, I think my nose should absolutely be a penis.
Yes.
Dude. Like, there are so many decisions in this movie that I just will never be able to understand.
That is why I have a love for this movie. It's not even a love, it's more of a fascination for this movie, because had I put on this movie and it was a B horror movie with nobodies, I would say this is one of the most ridiculous movies I've ever seen. So the fact that it was like a big budget knockout celebrity movie makes it so much more interesting to me.
$8.5 million on its $40 million budget.
Yeah.
Like,
I would do want to acknowledge that Taylor Negron is in this movie. Of course he is, because he is last generation's Fred Armisen, where it's like, he's kind of Hispanic, so let's put him... he's like vaguely foreign, so any foreign character, he's just going to play that. Cuban? Sure. Mexican? Sure.
That's the weirdest thing about him is that he's the whitest person in this movie.
But it's not even just this movie. Like, any movie I've seen him in, he plays someone who is semi-foreign.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes no sense because his accents are terrible. They're absolute garbage.
One of the things that I actually do like in this movie is the fact that the roller coaster Mr. Bone Stripper gets its own theme song that plays every single time that someone's on it.
I knew that you liked the dark ride. I forgot that Brian picked it because I saw the dark ride and I was like, oh, Matt picked this. And I was like, oh, wait, no, Brian picked it.
Yeah. Theme song performed by Damn Yankees.
Oh, wow. Wow. The music in this film, and we'll get to this a little bit later too, it is literally uncool dad picks what he thinks is hip 1990 music. It's so uncomfortably dumb.
He was ahead of the curve. He got Tupac in there.
Yeah.
No, he got fucking Digital Underground, and he got Tupac
I literally
with
wrote
Digital
R.I.P.
Underground.
Shock G.
That's what I wrote
in my
too!
notes.
Dude, holy fuck! I don't even like rap.
Nah, but Shock G, you know what? Here, we're going to take a quick...
Rap or nerdcore.
This is our
That's
little...
the whole point, right?
R.I.P. for Shock G. Shock G, like, the idea of someone coming up in rap and being like, I want to be rap, but I want to be the George Clinton of rap. Like, I want to be the rap equivalent of the P-Funk All-Stars, where there's all these people and they're in costumes, and I'm going to go so deep into this idea that I'm going to play 3 or 4 different characters in this group simultaneously. Like, I love that he literally on this track is playing both Shock G and Humpty Hump as if they're 2 separate guys in the band. Like,
yes. For anyone that has no interest in rap and no knowledge of rap whatsoever, but does know good hardcore comedy, Shock G is who John Leguizamo impersonates in the beginning of The Pest.
Yes, he does, actually. 100%.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Man, Brian, why haven't you picked The Pest for Patreon?
Dude, because I don't want to watch anything past the intro anymore.
That's what we do for money nowadays, though.
The only other Digital Underground notes that I had, since we were just talking about that scene, is same song is still quite a bop. And then a couple seconds later it says, but that organ solo.
Well, it's not even the organ solo. It's how good Digital Underground and even Tupac are as actors with just the jaw drop surprise. The one guy took off 2 pairs of sunglasses.
Are you?
But yeah, it's...
But wait. Do you think that he made that decision on his own?
Apparently, because Dan Aykroyd is not a director. He's a co-signer. He's an enabler.
Yeah, he really is. And the funniest thing about Dan Aykroyd being at the helm of this movie and never another movie again is that, like, this movie is so expensive. It just looks expensive. And the set pieces are massive.
You know who absolutely loved this movie? The crew that worked on it.
Yes, exactly, because the head guy had done kinetic sculpture before he started doing movie sets, and that's why there are all those kinetic sculptures and like all the metal sculpture work outside. It's because it was his passion, and Dan Aykroyd can't say no, apparently.
And honestly, I don't even think that it's that he doesn't have a backbone, because he had to talk to, like, he doesn't have a backbone to nice people, but like he went to the exec's office. He's like, guys, you gotta listen. The movie can't move forward without a train with all the things on it.
Oh my God, the part when he eats the fucking hot dog is the most disgusting thing I've watched in years. And I've watched some gross out fucking horror. Fucking dick-nosed Dan Aykroyd just, fucking eating a hot dog. It's not even like, it's not a real hot dog. It's like a boiled bratwurst that, like, it just reminded me of growing up when I still ate meat, and obviously, like, we'd have barbecues and stuff like that. The bratwurst would come out of the package looking like that, and my dad would like boil it a little bit to make it gray, and then he'd put it on the grill to crisp out the fucking intestines that are on the outside. Like, if you think about sausage, it is disgusting. Even if you eat
it's
meat.
absolutely repulsive.
But like,
I still eat
it. Pigs' assholes, and but you're eating intestines, right? The color was just so stomach churning, and that's what I had to say about it.
It's like gray. Yeah, it's disgusting.
You can't gross out 2 guys from Pennsylvania when it comes to that stuff.
We got scrapple as like a breakfast. Yeah,
exactly. They take a pig, they use what they can, and they take the leftover edible side of the pig and make hot dogs. And then the unedible side they grind down into a brick, call it scrapple, and feed it to humans in Pennsylvania. And that's what we eat. But I am glad that hot dog scene happened, because it made me feel better, where it's like, okay, I'm not absolutely repulsive, because that whole scene was supposed to be repulsive, and it's like, you guys want Hawaiian Punch? I'm like, I love Hawaiian Punch.
But warm
We got ants on
Hawaiian
a log.
Punch
Ants on a
opened
log.
up with a gas funnel. It is the amount of detail in that scene alone is just so shocking to me. Because they didn't spend any more time on any of the other like plot developments. Like there are tons of great set pieces in this movie, but no plot development and no like world building except in that scene.
There was also, and this is where I feel like they had to, because I read that Dan Aykroyd was never happy with the ending of the movie.
Oh, he wished that they would have like let him do his own cut, right?
Yeah.
Brian was joking, but it's also true.
Because the ending with the Chevy Chase shaped hole in the wall is some fucking Looney Tunes bullshit that I can't stand. But
and even if you hate it, think about how much more I hated it.
yeah, but what like bothers me is like there's a moment in this movie. I will never say this movie is good, but there's a moment where I was like, yo, that's actually a pretty solid horror ending. If they think that they're about to get this judge arrested, and then it's just like, and then they just go through Mr. Bone Stripper and that's the end of it. But then, and I think that I have a feeling that that's how it ended originally. And then the studio was like, no.
It needs more comedy. Why don't you make it Looney Tunes? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, because I was like, that's a nice horror ending. You know what I think as we're talking about this movie, and I had to do a quick Google to remind myself of this episode, this wouldn't have been a bad half hour like Tales from the Crypt episode. Like if you took the concept, consolidated it to like 22 minutes and just kept like the really disturbing stuff, you could make it work. And then I realized that there's already 2 Tales from the Crypt episodes.
Is the one where the woman gets pulled over for having too many letters in her license plate?
Yes.
Because that is my all-time favorite Tales from the Crypt episode. Yeah. Hell yes.
Let the punishment fit the crime. That's the one I was looking for, where it's Catherine O'Hara.
Catherine O'Hara, yeah.
She gets pulled over for having too many letters in her license plate, and she's a lawyer, and she starts fighting with the judge, and then it turns out that, like, when she loses the case, she now is forced to become the public defender for this town. So, like, that, and then there's the episode where I think it's Tim Curry. I might be wrong with who it is, but they play, like, 6 different characters in a family, and the only way that this salesman, it's, like, called Death to Some Salesman, and it's Tim Curry plays a man and his daughter, and he's going to murder the salesman unless he agrees to marry the daughter. And the daughter is Tim Curry in drag, but like with like really horrific prosthetics on him, like where it's like his skin is like peeling off and bubbling. Like that's kind of the other thing is like if you're going to like do the like Chevy Chase has to marry John Candy in drag storyline, like they really didn't make that character horrifying enough for that to be like the worst case scenario.
John Candy and drag's makeup was the makeup was good. Like how did she learn how to do makeup right? There was no TV. She was in basically Centralia. That's what Vankelvania, what's it called?
That's what the script was supposed to be called. This is what the script was called too, Vankelvania.
Yeah.
And they're like, no one's going to know how to pronounce that.
But like that's the thing is that like, yeah, and Dan Aykroyd wanted it to have that name, and he was always upset about that. And when he was like, oh, the fire's burning underneath because of the coal, I was like, oh, it's Centralia. Like, I love so many concepts in this movie. It's just the fact that the tone never hits, and the script is a mess. You could make it cool, you could make it horror.
Here's the solution. Something that I learned while reading that Wild and Crazy Guys book, which I've read almost 3 times now.
Oh, man.
It's slowly becoming one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
But what you learn in that is that Dan Aykroyd is a great idea man, but he's not a strong writer. And like they said, like the first Ghostbusters script was 350 pages because like he went like full Tolkien where he was like breaking down the like scientific logic of how the machines work and like all this other stuff. And he wanted to be like in the future where like everybody, like they're just like exterminators that you hire. And like we were just going to follow 2 dudes on the job. And it's just like a very mundane thing. And someone's like, no, you gotta, let's consolidate. I don't think he had anybody sitting around being like, let's consolidate these ideas.
No. Yeah, because if they did, they would have taken out the giant mutant babies, which
for
are
sure.
worthless. Except for one line, which I thought was very funny, especially when you take this into consideration that the film was written in, let's say, 89, and it was released in 91. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Demi Moore, who, by the way, I never knew was actually talented at physical comedy. She's the only
Yeah.
competent physical comedian in this movie. Even Dan Aykroyd is not competent.
Apparently, everyone said that she was absolutely a sweetheart to work with on this too.
I don't know. Shock G's little line about the cop made me laugh.
Oh, I don't. This is. Here's my impression of Brian. Oh, I don't know about Demi Moore being in the movie for 112 minutes, but I really like Shock G's 2 minutes because he made me laugh.
I'm just no. You said she was the only competent comedy delivery.
Because she's the only main character who does physical comedy. Shock G is literally
that's
in
like
it for 2 seconds.
I can't, like, the one that bothers me is, like, I am an unapologetic John Candy fan. And, like, John Candy's not bad in this, but you didn't give
He's a
him
straight man.
anything funny. Yeah,
No,
you
he's
didn't
a
give him
straight man.
anything funny to say or do in the entire script.
Dude, they dressed him up in
just
women's
there.
clothing and put makeup on him. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, and we have a terrible split screen of him acknowledging himself at the table,
very odd.
it's so low budget that the actual film stock gets grainy when that part happens.
But, so I wanted to talk a little bit, just for a second, about those giant mutant babies, right? Only redeeming quality of them is the part where Demi Moore is like, you should really consider some therapy, and the one of them goes, he won't go. For 1991, I find that so incredibly progressive because it's 2021, literally 30 years later, and we can't get adult men to go to fucking therapy.
That's what we're all about. That's really low key. That's what horror movie night's all about.
Go to fucking therapy. That's what we're saying.
This is the dumbest note I've ever written. I forgot about it. It just says John Candy in drag is not a divine choice, if you ask me.
That is awful.
Boy.
If you aren't if you're not a patron and you're not watching the video of this, you are not seeing my eyes almost fall out of my head in disgust.
So there is one other scene. Again, like there are, like you said, there's ideas that I like in this. I love the concept of like Demi Moore and Chevy Chase find themselves down in this cellar, and all of a sudden it's like, it's all of these people's IDs mixed with the articles about how they went missing.
But why
they
would
turn
they
around
keep
and
the
there's
articles?
fucking skeletons down there. And it's like, all right, cool.
I don't know, man.
He's proud of it. He knows he's untouchable. The whole town loves him.
The whole country, apparently, because the army came to arrest them and welcomed them with open arms.
I forgot to mention this, but in the beginning of the movie, if you didn't know that Chevy Chase did not give a shit in this movie, the very first scene, the first 5 minutes of the movie, he has just got a cigar in his mouth, and you cannot understand a single fucking thing he's saying with it in his mouth. I was like, I've never been more upset for a DVD to not have a subtitles feature in my entire life than watching this being like, what is he saying?
You selfish fuck. You would want someone to go and type this script out again
That's a good point.
so you can understand what Dan Aykroyd is saying?
No, Chevy Chase. Not even Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, yeah, it was Chevy Chase.
I can care less what Dan Aykroyd's saying half the time. The little dookie troll monsters is what I called them, just walking around, farting and making weird. Think about this.
Fuck
Think about this
monsters.
for a second. Poor Dan Aykroyd on the set of this movie, on at least a couple days, had to direct while dressed like that.
He had to be the one brother because no one else would do it. He couldn't get anyone else in the suit.
Which it's like, you could just cut the scene.
No, but no. My vision, you know. But can
I got
you
a simple
imagine?
solution. If people don't want to get in the suit, just don't do it.
It makes
It
too
added
much
nothing
sense.
to this movie.
You don't think that those were hilarious because they were wearing adult diapers?
Do we have any other notes about nothing?
No,
but trouble?
please, for fuck's sake, let's be done.
I want
Matt.
to talk about the babies some more. You still focus on the babies.
All right, Brian, what's your double feature with Nothing But Trouble?
Okay, all right, we're not going to talk about the babies. So my double feature
Gosh.
would be if Basket Case fucked Baby Huey, he would give birth to the babies in this movie. No, I'm gonna stick with Trouble, and the far superior film. Although I do have some love for this movie, Big Trouble in Little China.
Good
Yeah,
choice.
that's a better choice. Scott, how about you?
Oh, I'm going to go the very obvious and opposite way. I'm going TCM2 because this movie, because Nothing But Trouble is absolute bullshit to me. A waste of my hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes, whatever it was. Even Demi Moore in her absolutely adorable 1940s-esque, jorts, or, like her little, her gauchos, whatever they are, and her little, like halter top looks amazing. By the way, Chevy Chase denigrated her for being dressed too slutty in this movie. She has two outfits, maybe three, and one of them is sweatpants. The other one that she's in for 90% of the movie, there's no cleavage. Like the movie that I'm
we could do a whole episode just about Chevy Chase being a piece of shit. We're all aware.
But what I was going to say is that my double feature is with TCM2 because it's one of my all-time favorite horror movies, definitely top 10. It's so much fun. It has that same feeling of like, oh shit, I stumbled upon this fucked up family, but there's more humor in it than the first TCM, so I'm going to go with that. And also, it has a very uncomfortable dinner scene, just like Nothing But Trouble.
So I was torn between two movies. I'll say the one that I've decided not to go with because I've gone with it a bunch of times. But at a certain point, specifically when they were crossing the bridge and entering into this whole area, I was like, I could go for Freaked after this. Freaked is also a self-indulgence.
Did I mention Freaked in our discussion?
No.
I thought I mentioned it here, but this movie feels like Freaked a lot.
Yeah, it's
like a Freaked with a much higher budget, less lights, and a lot less direction.
So what I'm going to pick instead is a little obscure one because I don't know if I'll ever actually get to mention this movie again. A film called Haunted Honeymoon.
Oh.
Which I saw a really long time ago. It's pretty funny. It's fine, but it's very similar to this movie in two ways. First of all, the star of the movie also wrote, produced, and directed, which was Gene Wilder. And second of all, a male comic plays a drag role, except in this movie it's Dom DeLuise. Haunted Honeymoon is a perfectly fine, like, Mel Brooks-esque comedy that Gene Wilder wrote basically just for him and his wife, him and Gilda Radner. He wanted to make a movie with his wife, and he wrote this, like, funny little comedy about two newlyweds that end up spending their honeymoon in a haunted house. It's a good movie. I would rewatch it. There was parts that I definitely remember laughing at, but it didn't like stick in my memory distinctly. But I'm pretty sure it's like one of the last movies that he got to make before Gilda died. Like I think he was making it because she was sick at that time. So there is like that piece of like empathy that you have with it where it's like, this movie could be the worst movie ever, but it came from like the most sincere place possible. So like,
and
who am I to shit on
swept
it?
away, so
Yes, exactly. Brian, is there anything that you've watched recently that you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I actually forgot I watched this. I don't know why, but it completely slipped my mind until Scott said something last week, and I finally watched Blood and Flesh, the documentary on Al Adamson.
That's a great documentary.
Yeah, man.
Who's Al Adamson?
He's this B horror movie. I don't even want to say horror. Definitely like exploitation with horror. Like he did a little bit of both sides of the spectrum. And it's about his life and his death, his murder. And it's really good. I guess it kind of reminds me of this movie because literally he was one of those directors that no one has said a bad thing about that work with him. He's apparently like a really fucking nice guy, really cool guy. And I don't want to give too much away because if you haven't watched it, it's less than 2 hours, Scott. So it's a hard doc, less than 2 hours.
Yes.
And it's really good. So I don't want to give much away.
Yeah, I think I recommended it early in the pandemic on here because that was when I finally was like, let me work through this Shudder watch list that I've got like 50
is it on
titles
Shudder?
in.
Yes.
I will watch even the most mundane shit on Shudder because I just want to give them all of the views. Okay, so this is the only gatekeepy thing I'll ever say. Probably not. As a lifelong horror lover, or like since I knew what horror was, I have dumped a lot of money into the genre, right? And I feel like when I watch something on Amazon Prime, it's not supporting the genre. But when you watch something on Shudder, I feel, and I may be completely wrong, but I feel like Shudder is supporting the genre way more than Prime.
They're definitely giving more people voices.
Exactly, but like even from a financial standpoint, like J-Tro's talked about how little money he made having FP2 on Amazon Prime, right?
Yeah, you think he said he made like $10?
Fucking insane.
Something like
but
insane.
There's no way that Shudder isn't giving you a better deal.
Like, I'm sure that you obviously have like the hierarchy, right? Like if you're working for a major studio, if you're on like actual television, you're going to be getting a bigger paycheck than Shudder. But I agree with you. I think from like the streaming war zone, unless you're like the biggest show on Netflix or Hulu, you're probably not making much money.
But I can't imagine that Netflix's deals are as good as Shudder's deals, like a Shudder original, because I'm assuming that what Shudder is doing is they're giving a platform to, like, even a movie like Stay Out of the Fucking Attic, which I didn't really enjoy. I'm not really going to discuss it on this show, even in a What Did We Watch. I'm mentioning it right now as a tangential thing, but that's not a great movie. But I appreciate the fact that Shudder chose to say it's a Shudder original. They took the rights, they bought the rights, and they put it on their streaming app. I would have never known about it otherwise.
It's also the best way for if you're a horror person and you want to make horror movies, like, you think Netflix is going to give your little horror movie like accolades when it's just going to drop it without a word on the streaming service, and it's your job to promote
Netflix
it.
Horror movies. When was the last time you saw anything good on Netflix that wasn't a TV show?
2 or 3 years ago, they had like Ritual and Apostle, and then they just stopped.
Yeah. Apostle is probably the best horror thing that they've ever done. I mean, I guess was In the Tall Grass also a Netflix original?
Yeah,
I think it was. I didn't watch it, but I'm just saying, like,
it wasn't great.
No, I have no desire to watch it. That's why I didn't. But I'm saying, like, they did Gerald's Game, I think.
They did a lot of I feel like they have some type of Stephen King based deals, because they did a lot of those.
But that's also casting a much wider net than something like, like immortal Nazis doing experiments in 2020.
That's the difference. Slacks.
Exactly, Slacks.
Slacks
or
went
porno.
on Shudder, but like those went on Shudder, and I got an email being like, "Yo, motherfucker, this week we're talking about Slacks." If they had signed a deal to Netflix, it would have just been chilling in the hard section, and the only way anybody would have seen it is if it was so good that word of mouth really started to like blow up across the internet.
Yeah.
Put it this way: there's a show called Flaked, right? Mm-hmm. Created by Will Arnett. He scheduled a meeting, and it took him 6 months to get a meeting with Netflix. So how much do you think your indie flick is going to be?
Yeah, exactly. Scott, what's something you watch that you want to talk about?
This is also almost like a weird double feature, but so I watched Nothing But Trouble.
Me too.
On a Monday, right? And it was painful. And then Monday night, Megan's like, "Have you ever watched The Butcher's Wife?" And I'm like, "I don't even know what that is." And she's like, "Oh, it's cute. Let's watch it." Because she's been finding all these, like, I don't know how we got on this rabbit hole on like Hulu or whatever of all these like 80s and 90s like rom-com-y kind of things. We had watched My Cousin Vinny, and then she was like, "Let's watch The Butcher's Wife." I remember it being cute. Demi Moore, 1991, literally had to have been filmed right before or right after. I think it was right before they did Nothing But Trouble. So it would have been like 1990. She probably went right from Butcher's Wife, because she had long blonde hair in Butcher's Wife, and I'm pretty sure it's her hair with extensions, to her short, her typical early 90s bob black hair do. And it's super cute. Yeah. Oh, Demi Moore is absolutely gorgeous. But have either of you guys ever watched The Butcher's Wife? No. Jeff Daniels.
I feel like I remember the title.
If it's 90s and Jeff Daniels, it's got my attention.
He's a douchebag in it, but like it's entertaining. Yeah, his character's pretty irredeemable. But
I was about to say he was a charm in the 90s.
Well, watch it. It's an enjoyable flick, but nothing really bad happens. She's a clairvoyant, and so she sees the future, and she like basically fixes all these people's love lives. It's cute. It's a cute movie, but very funny that like literally the day I finished watching Nothing But Trouble, Megan's like, "Let's watch this movie that I'd never heard of," and it's the same time, same actress. It's crazy. So anyway, that's what
She's very sweet too. I love Demi Moore.
Yeah,
very sweet lady.
All right, and I'll make mine real quick. So I'm watching this really obscure show. Should have gotten a lot more attention than it did. It's called Lost.
Fuck you.
And I had tried Lost like years ago and was like, I'm not into it. But I finally was like, let me just sit down and watch it. I got nothing going on, and I like it so far. I know that people really hate it, the ending, but I'm also noticing something. I think Jonathan said this before, and I'm realizing what he meant was he was like, people keep talking about how confusing Lost is, and when they say that, I know that they've never read a comic book before, because like the whole show is comic book logic. It's like alternate realities, different timelines, like all the shit that, like, if you've even read a couple DC comic books, you're just like, oh, they're on a different Earth now. Got it. But like, I'm sure that like in the early 2000s when like we weren't doing multiverse stories on like CW shows just yet, that was just like, what the fuck is happening?
Did you guys see the TikTok on video game logic?
No.
Where it's like he's like, all right, we gotta get in this. We gotta find a snake key. I think it's in the third floor. He's like, do you realize how insane this is? Like, all these doors are locked and they need unique keys. He's like, he doesn't want us to escape, but he didn't know we were coming. That's what I don't get. Like, if this guy had to take a piss, he can't even get into his bathroom. He's got to find the snake key that's hidden in a box that he has to solve a puzzle in order to get.
I love it.
But yeah, Lost, highly recommended. It's a bit obscure, but I think you'll enjoy it. So, That was Nothing But Trouble, as picked by Brian from 1991. He's celebrating on video. Once again, if you go over to the Patreon, patreon.com/HMN podcast, you can watch our beautiful faces while we do this. We're going to stick in...
promise this is the last, eye roll Brian Kelly pick this quarter.
Oh, he's going to kill it for the next,
promise.
3 months, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to stick around in the 90s next week for my pick. We're doing another film that was kind of looked at as a bit self-indulgent and egotistical, but I think that it turned out a better product in the long run. We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see how it holds up. So come right back, over here sometime next week and find out what movie we're talking about.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network. You're listening to the Geekscape Network.